It began in August of 1993 in the rugged wilderness of southern Siberia. A group of 7 hikers, led by a highly experienced instructor named Lyudmila Korovina, set off into the Kamar-Daban mountain range. The area, while scenic and known for its natural beauty, is also unpredictable and unforgiving, with sharp terrain, dense forests, and sudden drops in temperature even during the summer months. Korovina had been leading groups for years and was well respected for her survival skills and leadership. Nothing about the trip was supposed to be particularly dangerous. In fact, these hikers were considered experienced. Most were students or trainees of Korovina, and among them was her own daughter, also trained in survival. They were not the only group in the region at the time. Another group of hikers was taking a parallel route through the mountains, and it is through them, as well as the sole survivor of Korovina's group, that the full extent of the horror was revealed. For days, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The hikers kept to schedule, moved through the planned checkpoints, and the weather remained fair, though colder than expected. The group was in high spirits. They had brought enough food, supplies, and equipment for a multi-day trek, and they were all familiar with the challenges of hiking through this part of Russia. Then something happened. Something so strange, so violently sudden, that it left 6 people dead and 1 young woman running for her life through the mountains, traumatized and alone. Valentina Utochenko was the youngest member of the group and the only one who lived. When rescuers eventually found her, days after the incident, she was in a state of near total shock. Exhausted, starving, and barely able to speak, she managed to give a rough account of what she had witnessed. According to her, it started with one hiker suddenly collapsing. Without warning or signs of sickness, the man dropped to the ground, convulsing violently. Blood began to pour from his eyes and ears. He foamed at the mouth. Then another hiker started screaming, clutching his throat as if something was burning him from the inside. Panic spread instantly. The hikers tried to help, but within minutes, a chain reaction began. One after the other, they started exhibiting the same symptoms: wild, uncontrolled convulsions, foam, bleeding, screaming. Some tore at their own throats, some clawed at their faces. And then, something even more disturbing, some began to laugh. Not out of joy, but in a high-pitched, frenzied, terrifying way. Laughter that turned into shrieks, and then silence. Lyudmila Korovina herself was among the first to fall. Despite her training, despite everything she had prepared for, her body collapsed just like the others. She bled from the nose and mouth, and her eyes remained open, frozen in horror. Valentina watched her mentor and the others die one by one, unable to do anything. The deaths were not immediate. They took minutes. Some hikers fled in a panic, only to collapse a few yards away, twisted in pain, their faces contorted into unnatural expressions. It was like something invisible had passed through the group, striking them down without mercy. Valentina ran. She didn't know where she was going. She left behind the bodies of her friends, her teacher, even Korovina's daughter. The mountains offered no comfort. The weather had shifted, and the temperature dropped. She had minimal supplies. For 3 days, she wandered the forest and slopes alone, terrified that whatever had killed her companions would come for her next. She said she barely slept. She was cold, hungry, and in shock. She moved only by instinct. Eventually, she stumbled upon the second group of hikers in the region. They were shocked by her condition. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, her body trembling. She was taken to safety, and emergency services were contacted. Search teams were dispatched into the mountains to recover the others. What they found only deepened the mystery. 6 bodies were discovered, scattered in a pattern that suggested a desperate attempt to flee. Their faces were still frozen in expressions of terror or pain. Some were missing shoes. Others had minor scratches or bruises, but nothing that explained what had caused such a violent reaction. Autopsies were conducted. The official reports pointed to hypothermia and unspecified pulmonary edema, or fluid buildup in the lungs. There were no signs of trauma consistent with an animal attack, no broken bones from a fall, no wounds from weapons, and, perhaps most puzzling of all, no traces of known toxins or poisons in their systems. So how had 6 young, healthy people died so suddenly, so violently, in such a short time? Valentina's story was dismissed by some officials as a hallucination brought on by stress or trauma. But it doesn't explain the conditions of the bodies. It doesn't explain the bleeding, the foaming mouths, or the facial contortions. And it doesn't explain why the group had split apart in such a frantic way. Several theories began to surface. The most prominent was that the group had been exposed to some kind of unknown or natural toxin, perhaps from a poisonous plant, contaminated water, or a release of underground gas. Siberia is known for its geothermal activity. Some speculated that toxic gases like carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide could have been released from the earth, especially at high elevations. These gases are odorless, and some can cause hallucinations, nausea, and sudden death. But that theory failed to account for the bleeding. It also couldn't explain why Valentina survived unharmed after staying with the group during the exposure. Another theory suggested the involvement of military experiments. The early 1990s were a period of chaos in the post-Soviet era, and the remote regions of Siberia were not strangers to classified activities. Some wondered if the group had stumbled upon something they shouldn't have: a weapons test, a chemical agent, or some sort of exposure to an experimental substance. There were no official reports to support this, of course, but in Russia, a lack of reports is hardly proof that nothing happened. Still, no evidence of such tests was ever found, and there were no warnings or restricted areas in the vicinity at the time of the hike. Then, there are the more supernatural explanations. Many Russians drew immediate comparisons to the Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959, in which 9 hikers died under equally mysterious circumstances. The similarities are disturbing. An experienced group, a sudden and unexplained panic, scattered bodies showing signs of internal trauma without external wounds, and a survivor unable to provide a complete explanation. Some believe there is something in the Siberian wilderness, something old, something unknown, an energy, perhaps, a force that causes people to go mad, to die, to vanish. Others suggested psychological explanations. Shared psychosis, also known as folie à plusieurs, is a phenomenon where delusions and hysteria can spread among a closely bonded group under stress. But again, this doesn't explain the physical symptoms observed in the victims. Delusions don't make you bleed from the eyes. The case of the Kamar Daban hikers quickly faded from mainstream news. It was overshadowed by political and economic turmoil in Russia during the 1990s. No official foul play was ever declared. The deaths were ruled accidental, and Valentina was never investigated further. She eventually disappeared from public life, likely still haunted by what she saw in the mountains that day. Few interviews, no further comments. Years passed, and only those deeply interested in wilderness mysteries or unsolved deaths remembered the incident. But among those who did, the story became something more. A chilling example of how, even in the modern age, there are places on this earth where logic breaks down, where the rules don't apply, where things can happen with no cause, no answer, and no justice. There's something uniquely terrifying about true stories like this. They begin in normalcy, just a hike, a group of friends, a planned route, good weather. They don't start with murder or supernatural elements. There's no warning, no sinister setup. Just people doing something they've done a dozen times before. Then, without explanation, they're gone. Their faces twisted in pain. Their lives ended in an instant. The survivor left behind not knowing what happened. The families left without closure, the world moving on. As Russia emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of its secret military programs were left unchecked. It was an era of political chaos and reformation, and the military continued to conduct experiments far from prying eyes. These experiments often took place in isolated parts of Siberia. Some believe the group might have accidentally wandered into an area where classified tests were being conducted, which could explain the sudden and inexplicable symptoms that took over the hikers. Could they have been exposed to an undetectable chemical agent, one that wasn't found in their systems, and yet wreaked havoc on their bodies? Some have gone so far as to claim that this was a covert test of biological warfare, or perhaps an accidental release of a new toxin meant to be tested on a population that was unlikely to speak out. But once again, no hard evidence has surfaced to support this theory, and without proof, it remains just that, a theory. Yet, even in the absence of proof, rumors surrounding the Kamardaban massacre continue to grow. In particular, the notion that it is somehow connected to the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident, another case of unexplained death in the Russian wilderness, has caught the imagination of many. The similarities between the two events are striking. Both involve highly trained, experienced hikers who found themselves in remote, challenging areas. Both events involve bizarre symptoms: sudden panic, convulsions, strange laughter, and the bizarre positioning of the bodies. And in both cases, the survivors' accounts have been dismissed as unreliable, their stories cast into the shadows of speculation and disbelief. Is there a connection between the Kamardaban massacre and Dyatlov Pass? Could these deaths be the result of some unknown force, or perhaps even something supernatural? One particularly unsettling piece of information that has surfaced recently suggests that some hikers who were familiar with the Kamardaban area had experienced similar occurrences in the past, not on the scale of the massacre, but still enough to make them uneasy. There were stories of strange occurrences, like hikers feeling an oppressive weight or hearing eerie sounds echoing through the mountains. One hiker reportedly even saw a glowing light on the horizon just before the tragic event unfolded. This light was never explained, and no one has come forward to definitively confirm or deny its presence. But the fact that it mirrors some of the phenomena described during the Dyatlov Pass incident, such as the strange lights in the sky, has led some to wonder if there is something about the region that is simply inexplicable. Could there be some force, ancient or otherworldly, that has been linked to these deaths? Some have speculated that the area has ties to ancient rituals or even local legends about curses, tales of forbidden lands where mankind's encroachment provokes the wrath of forces beyond our understanding. These types of supernatural theories have gained traction among conspiracy theorists, but there is little in the way of tangible evidence to back them up. Nevertheless, the idea of an ancient force hiding in the vastness of Siberia's mountains has a certain sinister allure, and it helps explain why the Kamardaban incident continues to capture the imagination of those who are fascinated by the unknown. More disturbing still is the silence of Valentina Utochenko, the lone survivor. After her rescue, she was interviewed briefly by authorities, but soon after, she disappeared from the public eye. In the years following the massacre, There have been sporadic reports of Valentina's sightings, though none have been confirmed. Some suggest that she has been deeply affected by the trauma of that night, while others believe she may have been silenced, either by fear or by something more ominous. Valentina's reluctance to speak further about the massacre, or even engage in interviews, has only served to fuel the conspiracy theories surrounding the event. Why wouldn't she speak? Was she too afraid? Did she know something she wasn't telling? To this day, there have been no further revelations about the Qamar Daban tragedy. The case remains unsolved. The hikers' deaths are officially recorded as the result of an unknown cause, but that explanation, while convenient, does little to satisfy the countless theories that have sprouted in the years since. The Qamar Daban massacre continues to sit at the intersection of mystery, horror, and the unexplained, a testament to how sometimes even the most experienced and prepared hikers can encounter forces beyond their comprehension. In the end, the most terrifying thing about the Qamar Daban massacre is that it forces us to confront the fact that there are still places in the world where things happen. Things that defy logic, things that science cannot explain, and things that leave people forever haunted, their minds and bodies scarred by an experience they can't begin to understand. The Qamar Daban massacre remains one of Russia's most disturbing modern unsolved mysteries. To this day, no one can explain what happened on that mountain. The details are too bizarre for science, too brutal for coincidence, and too unexplained to accept. It sits alongside the Dyatlov Pass as another example of the wilderness swallowing people whole and leaving behind only questions, only fear,